Captain Vexlin Lior was having one of those days where she wished the universe had an off switch, preferably right under her boot. But here she was again, in the synthetic dreamscape of a battlefield that made her head spin like a cheap thrill ride. The sky was a bilious shade of purple, likely sponsored by some drunk god with a twisted sense of humor, and the ground seemed to ripple like water. It was nauseating, but hey, nothing like the threat of imminent death to keep lunch firmly where it belonged. "Echo Phalanx, fall in," Vexlin shouted, her voice cutting through the surreal nightmare like a knife through overcooked synth meat. Her unit scrambled into position, each as disheveled and pissed off as she felt. Corporal Nix, the unit's heavy gunner, was already grumbling about how he'd been dreaming of a beach, complete with margaritas and a sun that didn't try to murder you every 10 minutes. "This better be good, Cap," he muttered, hefting his massive weapon like it was a child's toy. "Oh, it's better than good, Nix," Vexlin replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. It's another fun-filled day in hell. The synthetic battlefield was their custom torture chamber, courtesy of the Viathans, a race of aliens whose primary goal seemed to be turning human existence into a never-ending loop of chaos. Someone, somewhere, had decided the best way to study human weaknesses was to clone them and run them through this hyper-realistic meat grinder. The Echo Phalanx was stuck replaying this charade until they cracked or clocked out for good. "What's the sitrep, Captain?" Lieutenant Rax asked, his tone as dry as a Martian desert. He was the unit's strategist, though how one strategizes against the absurdity of alien time loops was anyone's guess. "The usual," Vexlin sighed, rubbing her temples. "Viathans want to clone the perfect human, as if that's a thing, and they're using their Groundhog Day gimmick to see what makes us tick." Rax snorted, adjusting his visor. "Perfect human, they clearly haven't met us. Or maybe they have," chimed in Sergeant Klee with a wry grin. She was the sharpshooter, deadly accurate and just as sharp with her tongue. "We're the baseline, which is why we're stuck in this cosmic hamster wheel." "Great," Nix groaned. "A perfect version of us, that's terrifying," Vexlin chuckled darkly. "Yeah, imagine me but with more charm and less hangover." The ground trembled violently, a reminder that the dreamscape could turn nightmare in an instant. Vexlin steadied herself, her mind racing through the 100 ways they could die today. She liked to think of it as a motivational exercise. "All right, team," she barked. "Focus. We need to find out what the Viathans are up to this time." The Echo Phalanx moved out, a ragtag band of misfits bound together by the shared misery of alien mind games. Vexlin led them with a grim determination, her eyes scanning for any sign of the enemy. The landscape shifted and warped around them, as if the Viathans were constantly changing the parameters just to mess with their heads. "What do you think they do with all this data?" Nix asked as they trudged through what appeared to be a forest of metallic trees. "Probably try to sell it back to us as self-help," Klee replied. "How to be a better human, the Viathan way." Rax smirked. "I'd read it just for the laugh." "You laugh now," Vexlin said, her eyes scanning the horizon. "But if they figure out how to make the perfect human, we're screwed." "Guess it's a good thing we're so imperfect then," Nix shot back, grinning. They pressed on, their banter a thin shield against the madness they faced. Vexlin felt a rare swell of pride in her team. They might be rough around the edges, but they were hers, and that counted for something in this god-forsaken loop. "Contacts," Klee barked suddenly, dropping to one knee and bringing her rifle up. Vexlin followed her line of sight and cursed under her breath. A group of Viathan constructs, humanoid and eerily perfect, were emerging from the distorted forest ahead. They moved with the kind of precision only machines could muster, a chilling contrast to the chaos of their surroundings. "Engage," Vexlin ordered, raising her own weapon. The Echo Phalanx opened fire, their shots ringing out like thunder in the dreamscape. Vexlin could feel the familiar adrenaline rush, the chaos of battle wiping away the fatigue of endless repetition. She squeezed the trigger again and again, the recoil of her rifle a comforting reminder that some things were still real. The Viathan constructs returned fire, their shots precise and deadly. Vexlin ducked behind a twisted metal tree, the bark sparking as rounds slammed into it. "These bastards get smarter every time," Nix shouted over the din, his heavy weapon blazing. "Yeah, well, we're stubborn," Vexlin retorted, popping off a few more rounds. The fight was brutal and fast, a blur of motion and noise. Vexlin lost sight of her team in the chaos, her focus narrowing to the immediate threat. The constructs were relentless, but the Echo Phalanx was nothing if not determined. "Captain?" Rax's voice crackled over the comm, urgent and strained. "What is it?" Vexlin demanded, ducking as another shot whizzed by. "I found something. Coordinates ahead. It's a Viathan tech node. Might be controlling the loop." Vexlin's heart leapt. If they could disrupt the node, maybe they could break the cycle, even if just for a moment. "Echo Phalanx, converge on Rax's position," she ordered, weaving through the melee towards the coordinates. Her team regrouped, fighting their way through the remaining constructs with grim efficiency. Vexlin felt a flicker of hope, a dangerous and rare emotion in their line of work. They reached the node, a pulsating mass of alien technology that seemed to thrum with malicious intent. Rax was already there, his fingers flying over his handheld device as he tried to interface with the alien tech. "Can you shut it down?" Vexlin asked, breathless and tense. "Maybe," Rax replied, his eyes glued to the screen. "Or I might just blow us all to hell, 50-50 really." "I've always liked those odds," Nix said, grinning even as he reloaded his weapon. "Do it," Vexlin ordered, her voice firm. Rax nodded, his fingers dancing over the device with practiced ease. The node pulsed faster, the air around it crackling with energy. Come on," Vexlin whispered, her eyes darting around for any sign of reinforcements. The node let out a keening wail, a high-pitched scream that set Vexlin's teeth on edge. Then with a blinding flash and a concussive blast, it exploded. Vexlin was thrown to the ground, her ears ringing and her vision swimming. She lay there for a moment, dazed and disoriented, before pulling herself to her feet. "Everyone's still breathing," she called out, her voice hoarse. "Barely," Klee replied, shaking her head to clear it. "Rax?" Vexlin asked, turning to where the strategist had been. Rax was on the ground, looking more than a little singed, but alive. He gave her a shaky thumbs up. "Nice work," Vexlin said, pulling him to his feet. The dreamscape was shifting again, the sky darkening and the ground stabilizing. Vexlin felt a strange sense of calm, as if something had genuinely changed. "Think we finally broke the loop?" Nix asked, his tone hopeful for once. Vexlin was about to reply when the sky split open, and a new wave of constructs poured through. The Viathans weren't done with them yet. "Guess not," Vexlin muttered, raising her weapon once more. "Welcome to the next level, Echo Phalanx. Try not to die just yet." The battle raged anew, the Echo Phalanx facing their relentless foes with grit and grim humor. They fought not just for survival, but for the hope that one day they might finally wake up from this never-ending nightmare. And if they didn't, well, at least they'd go down shooting. The universe kicked them in the teeth, then spat on its boot just to make sure. That's how Captain Vexlin felt as they were thrown back into the nightmare dreamscape, this time with a splitting headache as the welcoming committee. "Anyone else feel like they just got steamrolled by a space truck?" Vexlin croaked, massaging her temples. The swirl of purple sky was enough to make her stomach churn, not to mention the ground, which seemed to be having an identity crisis, caught between being solid and liquid. "Yeah," Nix grunted, his voice barely audible over the incessant ringing in her ears. "But you look great, Cap, like a million creds after a bad investment." "Why, thank you, Corporal." "You always know how to bring a gal up," Vexlin shot back, dry as a Martian pub. She squinted through the haze. Her team was sprawled around, looking as if they'd been through a blender set to puree. Rax was lying on his back, staring at the sky, or perhaps trying to decode the universe's cruel joke in the clouds. "So, Loop 1, he said, levering himself upright and looking less than thrilled to be alive. "Loop 100 more like," Klee muttered, picking grit out of her hair and spitting it on the ground. "I feel like I've aged a decade since breakfast. Maybe this time we'll get free coffee," Nick suggested, hefting his weapon and wincing at the effort. Or at least a punch card. 10 loops and you get a free existential crisis. Vexlin snorted, then coughed as the air caught in her throat. If there's a punch card, I'm using it to punch someone in the face. The ground beneath them rippled again, a reminder that reality was only a suggestion here. All right, echo Phalanx up and at him, she ordered, the authority in her voice only slightly undermined by the way it cracked. They moved out, weapons at the ready, the familiarity of the routine both comforting and soul-crushing. It was like returning to a job you hated but with more gunfire and less coffee breaks. Question, Nick said, keeping pace alongside Vexlin. If we're stuck in a loop, what happens if we die? Do we just wake up again with a fresh headache or does it get worse? Never tried it, Vexlin replied. But if today ends up being a particularly bad day, maybe I'll volunteer as tribute. Cheers to that, Nix chuckled darkly, eyeing the horizon for the inevitable incoming doom. Rax joined them, still fiddling with his device as if it might magically spit out an answer. I've been thinking, he said, his voice serious. The loops might be getting shorter, or they're speeding things up. That node might have triggered a new pattern. Great, so now we have fast-forward nightmares, Klee commented. Just when I thought this couldn't get better. They pressed on, warily navigating the metallic forest that had become both familiar and alien. Vexlin couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, the hairs on the back of her neck prickling with uneasy intensity. I hate this place, she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. It's like being stuck in a bad dream where you can't find your pants. Nick snorted. If I ever dream about pants, shoot me. I prefer my dreams sans clothing and full of beach cocktails. The path led them to a clearing where the familiar hum of Viathan tech buzzed like an angry nest of hornets. Another node, this one larger and pulsating in rhythmic patterns that suggested it had a mind of its own. Guess we poke this one too and see if it bites, Vexlin said, signaling Rax forward. Rax approached it with the caution of a man defusing a bomb made out of rabid squirms. Last time was a 50-50 shot, remember? Still better odds than winning the lottery, Vexlin said, scanning their surroundings for any sign of trouble. Nix hefted his weapon. Scratch that, I'd take the lottery. At least then I could retire in pieces. Yeah, but don't you want to know how this story ends? Klee asked, taking position with her rifle ready. Not particularly, but here we are, Nix replied, grumbling under his breath as he checked his ammo. Rax's fingers flew over his device, the node flickering in response like a dying star. The air around them crackled with potential, the charge palpable on their skin. Vexlin felt a tickle of excitement laced with dread, like watching a slow-motion train wreck you couldn't look away from. All right, let's see what happens, Rax said finally, looking up with an expression that could only be described as resigned optimism. The node quivered, its surface rippling as if alive. Energy surged through it, casting bizarre shadows that danced across the clearing. Vexlin tensed, her finger hovering over the trigger, waiting for the inevitable backlash. Then just as quickly as it started, the node went dark. Silence fell, heavy and uncertain, as they all waited to see what fresh hell had been unleashed. Did it work? Nix asked, breaking the silence. A low growl interrupted before anyone could answer. From the shadows emerged a new kind of construct, sleeker, faster, and with a nasty gleam to its metallic surface. Guess not, Vexlin muttered, raising her weapon. Time to dance, echo Phalanx. The fight was brutal, each shot echoing in the confined space like a clap of thunder. Vexlin moved on instinct, her team around her in perfect disarray. The constructs were relentless, their precision unnervingly perfect, but the echo Phalanx was stubborn beyond reason. These tin cans just keep getting uglier, Nix shouted, his weapon blazing with each word. And smarter, Klee added, picking off a construct that had gotten a little too bold. And louder, Rax groused, ducking behind cover to avoid a barrage of energy bolts. Vexlin barked orders, her voice a steady beacon in the chaos. They fought as one, a well-oiled machine that had seen too much action to be anything but lethal. They would survive this, she thought fiercely, because that's what they did. They survived, even if it pissed off the universe. The battle raged until finally the constructs slowed, their numbers thinning. The last one fell with a satisfying crunch, the aftermath leaving them panting and wary. "Everyone still in one piece?" Vexlin asked, scanning her team. "More or less," Klee replied, flexing her fingers as if to count them. "But if this keeps up, I'm gonna start wishing for a pension plan." "At least you still got your good looks," Nix quipped, surveying the carnage. "I'm stuck with this mug," Vexlin chuckled, the sound more of a bark than anything. "Come on, let's move. We've got to figure out what these contraptions want and how to make them regret it." As they regrouped, Vexlin couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the cusp of something. Whether it was disaster or salvation, she couldn't tell. Maybe it was the influence of too much whiskey in better days, but she felt a stubborn glimmer of hope. They trudged onward, weapons at the ready, each step a defiance against the Viathan's twisted game. The dreamscape was shifting again, the colors bleeding into one another like a painter gone mad. Vexlin felt a pang of déjà vu, a sense that they'd walked this path before, even as the details slipped through her fingers like sand. "Funny how we keep ending up in the same mess," Nix observed, his tone carrying the weight of too many failed missions. "Not funny ha-ha, but funny I'm going to punch someone," Klee added, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the next disaster. They reached a cliff edge, the ground dropping away to reveal a vast nothingness that stretched to infinity. Vexlin stared into the void, a creeping dread settling in her bones. The universe felt too big here, too indifferent to their struggle. "Anyone else feel like we're being toyed with?" Rax asked, his voice low. "Like mice in a really crappy maze," Vexlin replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "But you know what they say about cornered rats. They bite," Nix said, grinning fiercely. "Damn right they do," Vexlin said, turning to face her team. "And so do we." They turned away from the void, their path uncertain but their resolve solid. Vexlin led them forward, a ragtag band of misfits bound together by shared hardship and a refusal to quit. They would fight, they would endure, and they would find a way to beat this loop, even if it meant tearing the whole dreamscape apart. The future was uncertain, filled with more questions than answers, but Echo Phalanx was ready for whatever came next. Because in the end they were human, and humans didn't back down. They fought, they laughed in the face of doom, and they survived. If they didn't, well, at least they'd go out with a bang, flipping the bird to fate itself. The Echo Phalanx trudged onward through the synthetic dreamscape, a battlefield as familiar as it was bizarre. Their boots squelched in the not-quite grass, the ground shifting beneath them in that unnerving way it always did, like a petulant child refusing to stay still. "All right, team," Captain Vexlin Lior said, her voice a blend of exasperation and forced optimism. "Let's see if we can outthink these overgrown calculators this time." "Outthink?" Corporal Nick snorted. "I'd settle for outlasting or outdrinking," Klee added, adjusting her rifle with a sigh that seemed to come from her soul. "Too bad they don't serve whiskey in these loops." Rax, their resident pessimist, though he'd argue he was just pragmatic, was already fiddling with his device, the one piece of tech they had that might give them an edge. "I swear, these Viathans are playing checkers while we're trying to play chess. Only problem is they keep flipping the board." Nix chuckled, though it was more of a dry cough. "If we manage to leave ourselves a decent hint this time, maybe we can avoid getting our asses handed to us again. Or at least get handed nicer asses," Klee quipped, scanning the horizon with a keen eye. The dreamscape was a kaleidoscope of color, the sky a perpetually shifting tapestry of purples and reds, as if the universe had decided to throw a tantrum with its paint set. And there, in the midst of this surreal madness, stood the Phalanx, determined, desperate, and just a little bit deranged. "Remember last loop?" Vexlin said, keeping her tone light as they trudged through another patch of deceptive terrain. "When we thought we'd outsmarted them with that decoy, yeah," Rax replied, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Right up until the decoy got smarter than us. Trickery's getting tough when even our own tricks don't trust us," Nix added, his eyes scanning for any clue, any sign that might hint at how they could turn the tables. They came upon another node, this one nestled in a grove of metallic trees that seemed to hum with an alien energy. It was larger, more ominous, and undoubtedly more important. The kind of node that practically screamed, "Mess with me, I dare you. Here we go again," Vexlin muttered, signaling to her team to cover her as they approached. Rax crouched by the node, his fingers dancing over his device in a practiced frenzy. "If I get electrocuted, someone better at least have the decency to send flowers. You can have all the flowers you want in the afterlife," Nyx shot back. "Just make sure they're not carnivorous." "Or Viathan," Klee added, her rifle trained on the shadows. As Rax worked, Vexlin reflected on their situation. The Viathans were using this dreamscape to poke and prod at their human captives, experimenting with traits and behaviors like mad scientists with a penchant for suffering. It was a sick game, and they were the unwilling pawns. "Any chance we can turn this to our advantage?" Vexlin asked, her eyes flicking between Rax and their surroundings. "Get them to study something else, like our capacity for inventing new swear words." Nyx grinned. "I'm pretty sure we've expanded the vocabulary of the universe. Not that it helps," Klee said, her tone a mix of resignation and defiance. "They're probably just documenting it for kicks." The node began to pulse, a steady rhythm that suggested something was happening. Whether it was good or bad was yet to be determined. Rax glanced up, his face a mask of concentration. "All right, I've left us a little present," he said, rising. "We'll see if future us can figure it out before everything goes pear-shaped." "Fingers crossed," Vexlin replied, gesturing for them to move out. "Let's not stick around to see how this particular nightmare unfolds." As they retreated, the ground beneath them shifted in that disconcerting way, and Vexlin couldn't shake the feeling that the landscape was alive, watching them with a cold, calculating intelligence. "What do you think the Viathans are after?" Klee asked as they moved, her tone contemplative. "What's the point of all this?" "Damned if I know," Vexlin said. "But it's got to be more than just target practice. Maybe they're trying to figure out what makes us tick." "Joke's on them," Nyx said with a dark chuckle. "I've been trying to figure that out myself for years." They skirted another clearing, wary of ambush, but the only sound was the whisper of the artificial wind through the alien foliage. It was almost peaceful, this moment of quiet before the inevitable storm. "Do you ever wonder if we're just chasing our own tails?" Rax asked, his voice thoughtful. "Running around in circles while they watch and laugh all the time," Vexlin admitted. "But we keep moving because it's better than standing still. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll stumble on something that tips the scales." "Hope so," Klee said, her eyes hard. "Because if I have to live another loop without some kind of progress, I might just start inventing new ways to go insane." The ground began to ripple more violently, the dreamscape's warning that another shift was imminent. Vexlin ordered them to halt, her instincts screaming that something was about to change. "Brace yourselves," she said, her voice carrying a weight of experience and weariness. "Looks like the universe is about to throw another curveball." And then it happened. The world around them twisted, the sky swirling like a cosmic drain, and the familiar sensation of being yanked from one reality to another hit them all at once. When the dizziness cleared, they found themselves in a place that was both eerily similar and unnervingly different. The ground was firmer here, the sky a darker shade of purple, and yet the air buzzed with the same oppressive energy. "Congratulations," Nyx said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "We've just unlocked the deluxe edition of hell." "Let's see what's changed," Vexlin said, trying to mask her frustration with determination. "Keep your eyes peeled for anything out of place." The dreamscape was as deceptive as ever, its terrain shifting subtly beneath their feet, always on the verge of tripping them up. But this time they were more prepared. They knew the signs to look for, the little tells that might offer a hint, a clue, a way out. "Over there," Klee called, pointing to a series of markings on a nearby surface. "Those weren't there last time," Rax approached, studying the symbols with a mix of curiosity and caution. Looks like something I left behind. A breadcrumb, maybe. Hope it's not moldy, Nix muttered, though his expression was hopeful. Vexlin nodded, a spark of something like hope flickering in her chest. All right, team. Let's see where this breadcrumb trail leads. They moved as one, their steps careful but determined, the weight of 1,000 failed loops hanging over them like a storm cloud. The path took them through more surreal landscapes, each more unsettling than the last. You know, Rax said as they navigated a particularly treacherous patch of ground, I think we're actually starting to get the hang of this. Speak for yourself, Klee replied, her tone wry. I'm still waiting for the part where we don't end up dead. Patience, Vexlin said, though she couldn't help but smile. Rome wasn't burned in a day. They reached another clearing, this one dominated by a massive construct that loomed like a sentinel. Its surface was smooth, almost liquid in appearance, and it pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to resonate in their bones. Looks important, Nix said, eyeing the construct with a mix of awe and suspicion. Think this is what's been causing us so much grief. Only one way to find out, Vexlin said, gesturing for Rax to do his thing. The strategist approached with the trepidation of someone who knew just how wrong things could go. His fingers flew over his device, the construct responding with a series of lights and sounds that defied explanation. Got to hand it to the Viathans, Rax muttered. They know how to make a puzzle. Let's just hope we've got the right pieces, Klee said, her rifle ready for whatever might follow. The air around them grew tense, the constructs pulsing increasing in tempo, as if keeping time with their racing hearts. Vexlin felt her breath catch, the anticipation laced with a tinge of dread. Then, with a sound like a thunderclap, the construct erupted in a blaze of light, blinding and all-consuming. The world tipped sideways, reality twisting in on itself, and they were drawn once more into the maelstrom of the loop. When the light faded, they were back at the start, sprawled on the ground like soldiers in some demented game of cosmic roulette. The familiar haze clung to the air and the sky loomed above them, mocking in its perpetual purple gloom. Well, that was fun, Nix said, coughing as he sat up. Can't wait to do it all over again. At least we left ourselves a clue, Rax said with a grim smile. Might be useful next time. Assuming there is a next time, Klee grumbled, though her eyes held a spark of determination. Vexlin surveyed her team, weary but unbroken, their faces a testament to resilience in the face of endless adversity. They were learning, adapting, becoming more than the sum of their parts. All right, Echo Phalanx, she said, her voice firm, the authority of a leader who refused to yield. Let's get back to work. We've got a loop to break. They rose as one, weapons ready, the dreamscape shifting beneath them like a living thing. They would continue to fight, to adapt, to find a way out of this nightmare, because that's what humans did. They survived, they adapted, and they fought like hell. And if the Viathans thought they could break the Echo Phalanx, they were in for a very rude awakening. With renewed determination, the Echo Phalanx marched forward into the unknown, a ragtag band of warriors bound by defiance and a refusal to surrender. They were human, and they would find a way to win, even if it killed them. Again, the universe seemed to have a twisted sense of humor. Every time Vexlin thought they'd made progress, the universe decided to punt them back to square one, like some cosmic game of whack-a-mole. The Echo Phalanx was once again sprawled out like a set of mismatched twister players, dumped unceremoniously onto the dreamscape's shifting ground. The sky was that same shade of purple that made Vexlin think the universe was in dire need of a new decorator. Nix groaned, struggling upright. I swear, if this is hell, it's got the worst interior design ever. Would explain why the devil's in such a bad mood, Klee added, brushing dirt off her rifle. And why we're stuck in this endless loop of misery. Vexlin heaved herself to her feet, trying to shake off the familiar disorientation. All right, team, let's get a grip. We've got work to do, and this loop isn't going to break itself. Rax, what's your read on the situation? Rax, ever the pessimist, was fiddling with his device like a gambler trying to coax a win from a slot machine. Same as before, everything's screwed and we're one bad decision away from being Viethan science projects. Sounds like a normal Tuesday, Nix quipped, checking his equipment with the air of a man resigned to constant disappointment. They moved out, their mood somewhere between gallows humor and sheer bloody-mindedness. The dreamscape felt more aggressive this time, the ground buckling and twisting like a sea in a storm. Vexlin figured it was the Viethans upping the ante, testing how much madness humans could endure before they snapped like overcooked spaghetti. The landscape morphed as they marched, trees with leaves like shattered glass brushing against their armor with soft, lethal whispers. Vexlin couldn't shake the feeling that the Viethans were watching, taking notes on how to break them faster. "Think they're getting bored of us?" Klee asked, her gaze sweeping the shifting shadows with unerring precision. "Wouldn't blame them," Rax said. "After all, we're just the warm-up band in this freak show." Vexlin spotted something in the distance, a structure that seemed to materialize out of nowhere, its outlines shimmering like a mirage. "Heads up, looks like we've got a contender for today's most likely to explode award." They approached with caution, Vexlin's instincts tingling. The structure was a tangled mess of conduits and panels, humming with an energy that felt both alien and hostile. It screamed trap in a dozen languages, but it was also their best shot at finding a way out of this digital hell. "Rax, you're up," Vexlin said, gesturing toward the construct. "Great," Rax muttered, stepping forward with the enthusiasm of a man heading to the dentist. "If this thing has a self-destruct button, remind me to push it." Nix snorted. "Just make sure you're not standing on it when you do." Rax's fingers danced over his device, the construct responding like it had a mind of its own, a very unpleasant, probably homicidal mind. As he worked, Vexlin surveyed the terrain, her thoughts a jumble of strategies and half-formed plans. "Ever think the Viethans are just using us to test their latest version of Sim City?" Nix asked, his tone light but his eyes hard. "If they are, they're doing a terrible job," Klee replied. "I mean, where's the fun? No cities, no people. Just us, their favorite lab rats." The tension in the air was palpable as Rax continued his work. Then, without warning, the construct flickered and a panel slid open, revealing a set of symbols etched into its surface. Vexlin leaned in, trying to make sense of the alien script. "Looks like a map or a recipe for disaster." Rax squinted at the symbols. "Could be a weakness in their system, or maybe just their grocery list." "Let's hope it's not for Viethan souffle," Klee said dryly, peering over Rax's shoulder. "Those things are murder on the digestion." Whatever it was their first real lead. A chance to maybe, just maybe, turn the tables on their captors. But before they could examine it further, the dreamscape shifted violently, as if the universe had decided that was enough fun for one day. The ground beneath them became a liquid nightmare, pulling them back into its depths. Vexlin felt herself slipping, reality stretching and distorting around her. For a moment she caught a glimpse of something vast and terrible, a shadow moving in the void before everything went black. When she came to, they were back at the beginning. Again. It was like déjà vu's crueler, more vindictive cousin had come to play. "Round and round we go," Nix said, his voice strained but attempting humor. "Next stop, insanity." "Already there," Rax grumbled, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. "Population, us." Vexlin pushed herself up, trying to suppress the frustration bubbling inside her. They were trapped in a loop, each reset erasing their progress, but this time they had something new, a glimmer of hope. "All right, listen up," she said, her voice cutting through the fog of fatigue and despair. "We've got a lead. And if it's what I think it is, we might finally have a way to hit them back." "Great," Klee said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Because I'm just about ready to start a revolution, one alien at a time." Vexlin nodded, feeling the resolve in her team. They were tired, beaten, but not broken, and as long as they had breath, they'd fight. "Let's get moving," Vexlin ordered, leading them forward into the shifting landscape once more. Each step was like walking on a tightrope over a pit of madness, but they kept going, driven by their shared desperation to escape. The dreamscape had a sense of humor that was as twisted as it was cruel, but Vexlin knew one thing for certain: they wouldn't go down without a fight. And if the Viathans thought they could keep the Echo Phalanx in their little loop forever, they had another thing coming. As they moved, the landscape seemed to ripple with a malevolent intelligence. Vexlin couldn't shake the feeling that the dreamscape was alive, watching them, testing them, like a cat playing with a mouse. But this time the mouse had a plan. Rax, ever the cynic, muttered under his breath, "If this ends with us all as Viathan barbecue, someone remind me to haunt them in the afterlife." "Save me a spot," Nyx replied, cracking a grin despite the circumstances. "We can be the ghostly critics of alien horror shows." Klee remained silent, her eyes scanning the horizon for threats, her rifle ready. She was their rock, the one who didn't flinch, even when the universe itself seemed to conspire against them. They reached the construct again, its alien architecture looming like a sentinel of doom. This time, Vexlin approached with a sense of purpose, her mind racing with possibilities and potential pitfalls. "All right," she said, addressing her team. "We know this thing has the answers. Rax, you're our key. Let's crack this mystery wide open." Rax nodded, stepping forward with a determination that belied his usual pessimism. He might have been a pessimist, but he was their pessimist, and damn good at it. The construct responded to his touch, lights flickering in a pattern that seemed almost teasing. The symbols reappeared, glowing with an ethereal luminescence that felt like a taunt. "Looks like they left us a breadcrumb," Klee said, her voice tinged with grudging respect. "Or a noose, depending on how you look at it." "Let's hope for bread," Nyx said, ever the pragmatist. Rax studied the symbols, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Looks like a sequence, a pattern. If we can decipher it, we might just find a way to break this loop." "Any ideas?" Vexlin asked, watching him work. Rax didn't look up. "Working on it, but I'd kill for a translator or a stiff drink." The air around them seemed to thrum with anticipation, the construct humming with a life of its own. Vexlin felt her pulse quicken, a mix of fear and hope. They were gambling with the devil's dice, but it was their only shot. Then, just as they began to see a glimmer of understanding, the world around them twisted like a kaleidoscope gone mad. The ground buckled, and the dreamscape began its all-too-familiar process of pulling them back to the start. "Not again," Vexlin breathed, bracing for impact. But this time, something was different. The reset came with a surge of energy, a jolt that left them gasping but still conscious. Reality wavered, the loop threatening to snap, and for a moment they glimpsed beyond the veil of the dreamscape. A brief vision of the Viathans, their alien forms silhouetted against the glow of their machines, their expressions unreadable. Then the world went dark. When the light returned, they were back in the loop, but the vision lingered in Vexlin's mind. A tantalizing hint of vulnerability in their captors, a chink in the armor of their oppressors. "We saw them," Klee said, her voice awed. "We actually saw them. And we're still here," Nyx added, disbelief evident in his tone. "Which means we're doing something right, or terribly wrong." Vexlin felt a grim satisfaction settle over her. The loop might hold them for now, but they had something the Viathans didn't count on: tenacity. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to tip the scales in their favor. "All right, team," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "We've got a vulnerability to exploit. Next loop we hit them harder and smarter, because we're not just survivors, we're warriors. And we're going to make sure the Viathans know just who they are up against." The Echo Phalanx straightened, their determination a palpable force, their spirits unyielding in the face of the universe's cruel joke. They might be caught in a loop, but they were far from finished. And if the Viathans thought they could keep playing God, they were in for a nasty surprise. With renewed resolve, they prepared to face the dreamscape once more, their hopes pinned on finding a way to break the chains that bound them. Because humans were nothing if not stubborn, and the Echo Phalanx was ready to prove it, one loop at a time. The synthetic dreamscape wasn't getting any prettier, and neither were the odds. The Echo Phalanx trudged through the ever-shifting mess of colors and ground that couldn't decide if it wanted to be a solid or a puddle, with the grace of a drunk at a wedding. "Well, if we die here, at least it'll be colorful," Nyx quipped, kicking at the ground as it rippled like a bad acid trip. "A technicolor demise. Who wouldn't sign up for that? Probably anyone with a shred of sanity left," Rax replied, staring at his device as if it might suddenly decide to give them winning lottery numbers. They'd been slogging through these loops for what felt like an eternity, each reset a cosmic joke at their expense. "Oh, look, the humans think they can win. How quaint." Vexlin led the way, her mind a storm of doubt and frustration. The Viathans were playing them like a damn fiddle, and she'd never felt more like an out-of-tune violin in her life. Being stuck in a loop was bad enough, but the real kicker was the growing friction within her team. Morale was slipping, and she couldn't blame them. "Can we at least agree that if we find the Viathan's control panel, first one to hit the off switch gets a medal?" Klee suggested, eyes scanning their kaleidoscope hellscape for anything that might want to kill them today. Not that they'd had much luck finding friendly faces anyway. "Sure, why not?" Vexlin replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Though knowing our luck, the switch will just reset the loop again." Klee nodded grimly. "Wouldn't that just be the icing on this cake of cosmic cruelty?" The ground beneath them rumbled ominously, as if in agreement. They'd been walking for what felt like eons, their only guide the faint memory of those alien symbols. Vexlin didn't hold much hope that they'd stumble into a solution, but damn if they weren't stubborn. "We've got to be missing something," Rax said, his device still offering little more than static and the occasional mocking beep. "Some way to turn this whole thing to our advantage." "Yeah, like how to turn a no-win scenario into a slightly less no-win one," Nyx added, his voice tinged with that special blend of sarcasm and desperation that had become his trademark. Vexlin glanced at her team, each one of them grimly determined to stick it out, even as the universe laughed in their faces. It was this kind of tenacity that had kept them from breaking, but even iron will had its limits. "Maybe next loop we should just take a nap," Nyx said, not entirely joking. "Wake up fresh and ready to die all over again." "If only we could wake up from this nightmare," Rax muttered, his fingers still tapping away at his device in some futile attempt to make sense of their situation. For Vexlin, each loop had begun to feel like a personal failure, a reminder of every decision she questioned. What if she'd missed something, overlooked a crucial detail? The weight of leadership was a heavy cloak, and today it felt suffocating. "Look," she finally said, forcing herself to focus. "We know they have a weakness. We just need to figure out how to poke at it until it breaks." "Like a bad relationship," Klee said with a half-hearted smile. "Just keep poking until someone cries or leaves." The ground shifted again, the dreamscape's way of reminding them who was really in charge. Each jolt felt like a sucker punch to their already battered morale. "Maybe we should ask the universe for a hint," Nyx suggested with a shrug. "Hey, big guy, just a clue, that's all we're asking." But the universe wasn't feeling generous. Instead, it hit them with another wave of disorientation, pulling the rug out from under them. Again. As they stumbled, Vexlin caught a glimpse of that shadowy vision of their captors, the Viathan's alien silhouettes mocking them with their very existence. "Reset in 3, 2, 1, Nyx counted down sarcastically as the world blurred and twisted around them. When Vexlin came to, her patience had worn thinner than a politician's promise. She slammed her fist into the ground, a useless gesture but somehow cathartic. "Not even a thank you note for our persistence," she growled, getting to her feet. "Ungrateful bastards." Rax picked himself up, dusting off as if it mattered. "I'd settle for a please try again screen. At least then we'd know we were getting somewhere." The team gathered themselves, ready for another round of hope-dashing futility. The fractures within the group were growing, like hairline cracks in glass that threatened to shatter under pressure. They needed a win, something to remind them why they kept fighting. "You okay, Cap?" Klee asked, her voice low enough not to carry to the others. Vexlin forced a smile, though she knew it didn't reach her eyes. Never better. Just another day in paradise. Clee nodded, unconvinced but unwilling to press. They all knew the stakes, and pushing too hard might end with them all at each other's throats. As they trudged on, Vexlin's mind wandered to darker places, questioning the very essence of their struggle. Were they really making a difference, or were they just spinning their wheels, doomed to repeat this cycle until their minds broke? Ever think this is just the universe's way of telling us we're not welcome? Nyx asked, tossing a rock into the shifting ground, watching it vanish without a trace. Maybe it's just a cosmic eviction notice, Rax replied, still fidgeting with his device with the kind of obsessive determination of a gambler who refuses to leave the table empty-handed. The dreamscape rippled again, a reminder that they had no say in their fate. But as they moved forward, Vexlin couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. A sliver of possibility, barely more than a whisper in the back of her mind. "All right," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "Let's see if we can at least annoy the hell out of them this time around." The Echo Phalanx pushed on, their resolve stitched together with sarcasm and sheer force of will. Each step was a defiance, a middle finger to the universe that insisted on their submission. They reached the construct again, its alien architecture both familiar and maddeningly cryptic. Vexlin nodded to Rax, who approached it like a man approaching a particularly nasty dog, ready to bite back if it had to. "Ever get the feeling you're just the punchline to someone else's joke?" Rax mused, his fingers flying over the device. "Every Ior of every day," Nyx replied. "But at least we're funny." Rax's efforts yielded the familiar symbols, their glowing presence a taunt and a promise. This time, though, Vexlin felt something shift, a quiet determination that refused to be extinguished. "Let's make them regret underestimating us," Vexlin said, her voice carrying the weight of determination and desperation. "If we're stuck dancing to their tune, let's at least change the rhythm." Clee grinned, the fire back in her eyes. "Time to make some noise." The Echo Phalanx prepared for another round, determination in their eyes and sarcasm on their lips. They might be caught in a loop, but they'd make damn sure the Viathans knew they were in for a fight. As the dreamscape twisted and threatened to reset once more, Vexlin felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they couldn't break free, but they could sure as hell make it interesting. And for now, that was enough. The universe might have stacked the deck against them, but they'd play their hand anyway. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was defying the odds and flipping the bird to whatever fate thought it could impose on them. The cycle continued, grim and relentless, but Vexlin knew one thing for certain. She'd rather go down swinging than sit quietly in defeat. With a final, determined push, they charged back into the fray, their laughter echoing through the dreamscape's twisted corridors. "Here's to another round," Nyx said, his voice carrying a note of grim determination. "May it be as delightful as the last. Or at least not worse," Rax added, smirking as they dove back into the endless loop. The Echo Phalanx charged forward, a force of nature against the cruel confines of the dreamscape. They might not win today or even tomorrow, but they would never stop trying. Because hope, no matter how small, was a fire that refused to die, and they'd keep it burning until the end. Vexlin felt like a stale piece of bread left out too long. Crusty, dry, and utterly fed up with the same old loop. But that didn't mean she was ready to be tossed in the bin. No, she had a plan, or at least the beginnings of one. It was time to stop reacting and start acting, because if the universe was going to keep throwing punches, she'd damn well punch back. She gathered the team, their faces all variations of exhaustion and skepticism. "Okay, listen up. I know we've been through the rinse cycle more times than a pair of cheap socks, but I've got an idea." Nyx raised an eyebrow, the universal signal for "oh really." He crossed his arms with the kind of sarcasm that could kill lesser beings. "An idea, you say? Does it involve not dying for a change?" "I'm all ears," Clee added, though she looked more like she was bracing for yet another wave of disappointment. Rax, of course, was still fiddling with his device like it might suddenly sprout wings and fly them out of there. As long as it doesn't involve throwing this thing into the abyss, I'm on board. Vexlin took a deep breath. Here's the deal. We're in a nightmare wrapped in a kaleidoscope of insanity, right? But that means it's unstable. We use that instability against the Viathans. Nick snorted, but there was a glimmer of interest in his eyes. You mean like shaking the table and making all the pieces fall off? I like it. Exactly, Vexlin said, feeling a flicker of hope stir. We've been thinking of this place as a trap, but it's a system. Systems can be hacked, disrupted. We just need to figure out the right lever to pull. Rax stopped tapping for a moment, the potential of something new catching his attention. You think we can send a message out of this mess? Maybe let the outside world know we're still kicking. Klee looked intrigued. And what exactly do we tell them? Wish you were here seems a bit insufficient. Vexlin grinned, the expression feeling foreign but good. We tell them to get ready, because we're going to turn this dreamscape into a nightmare for the Viathans. The team shared a glance, the kind that passed for a silent agreement in their twisted camaraderie. It wasn't much, but it was something, and something was a hell of a lot better than nothing. All right, Vexlin said, her voice firm. Rax, I need you to figure out how we can utilize the instability. Maybe that device of yours can finally earn its keep. Rax shrugged, but there was a spark in his eyes. I'll see what I can do, but no promises. This thing's about as cooperative as a cat in a bathtub. Klee snickered. Let's just hope it doesn't leave us all soaking wet. They set to work, each one of them driven by the lure of a way out. Vexlin felt something shift within her, an unfamiliar sensation that she hesitated to name, lest it vanish. Could it be hope? Maybe. Or maybe just the joy of finally having something to do other than wait for the next cosmic smackdown. Rax hunched over his device like a wizard over a spellbook, muttering imprecations at the circuitry as if it might magically comply. You know, he said without looking up, if this thing does work, we should probably say something profound. Nix chuckled. Profound? How about help, we're stuck in a bad acid trip? Or greetings from the other side, wish you were here, Klee added, her voice a mix of amusement and determination. Vexlin shook her head but couldn't suppress a smile. Let's just make sure it works first. Then we can worry about our communications degree. The ground shifted again, reminding them that the only constant was change, and not the good kind. But this time they were ready, bracing themselves against the disorientation with grim resolve. Iors passed, or what they thought were Iors. Time had a way of warping in the dreamscape, stretching and compressing like some cosmic rubber band. But finally, Rax looked up, eyes gleaming with a mix of triumph and disbelief. I think I've got something. If we can tap into the dreamscape's frequency, we might be able to send a pulse, disrupt the loop for a moment. Vexlin felt her heart skip, hope clawing its way to the surface. And you're sure this won't just blow us to bits? Rax shrugged, the gesture as familiar as it was infuriating. There's only one way to find out. Ah, the famous last words, Nix quipped. I've always wanted to be a guinea pig in a mad scientist's experiment. Too late to back out now, Klee said, her voice firm. We're all in this together. Vexlin nodded, her resolve hardening into steel. Then let's do it. If we pull this off, at least we'll know we did something, even if it's just to flip the bird to our captors. Rax began the process, his fingers dancing over the device with a kind of frantic energy that suggested both desperation and determination. The team gathered around him, each one holding their breath as if afraid to break whatever tenuous link they might be forming with freedom. The dreamscape rippled, a wave of energy pulsing through the ground beneath their feet. It was like standing on the precipice of a new reality, one where they might actually have a fighting chance. But then the ground steadied, and Vexlin felt a pang of disappointment stab through her. Did it work? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Rax checked the device, a smile slowly spreading across his face. We sent the message. Now we just have to hope someone out there is listening. That's a lot of hope for a universe that keeps kicking us in the teeth, Nix remarked, but there was a hint of optimism in his tone that hadn't been there before. We've got nothing else, Klee said, her voice strong. "And if this doesn't work, at least we tried." Vexlin nodded, refusing to let despair take hold. "And if it does, the Viathans won't know what hit them." The dreamscape was still, as if holding its breath along with them. But within that silence, Vexlin felt the stirrings of something she hadn't dared to consider before: possibility. "We've done what we can," she said, looking at each member of her team in turn. "Now we prepare for whatever comes next." As they settled in to wait, each one lost in their thoughts, Vexlin couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of her team. They'd been battered, bruised, and worn thin by a relentless cycle of futility, but still, they fought on. If there was one thing humans excelled at, it was refusing to give up, even when the odds were laughably stacked against them. "Hey," Nick said, breaking the silence, "if we do get out of here, first round's on me," Klee snorted. "That's a promise I'm holding you to." "Just don't expect anything fancy," Nix replied with a grin. "Unless you count moonshine as fancy." Vexlin shook her head but couldn't suppress a chuckle. "I'll take whatever drink comes with a side of freedom." The team settled into a comfortable silence, the weight of their shared history binding them together. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them going, one step at a time. As the dreamscape ebbed and flowed around them, Vexlin felt a quiet certainty take root. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, and they'd make damn sure the Viathans knew they were in for a fight. The universe might be against them, but they'd never stop pushing back, because hope, however fragile, was a flame that refused to be extinguished, and as long as they had each other, they'd keep it burning until the end. "Here's to another round," Vexlin said, raising an imaginary glass. "May it be the one that finally cracks this damn loop wide open." The Echo Phalanx nodded, their resolve as unyielding as the stars themselves. They might be caught in a cosmic game of cat and mouse, but they'd never stop trying to flip the board. Because in the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about refusing to let fate have the last word. And they'd keep fighting, laughing, and defying until the universe had no choice but to take notice. "To the end of the line," Rax said, his voice a quiet promise. And with that, they returned to their vigil, ready for whatever the universe had in store. The Echo Phalanx stared at the dreamscape around them, waiting for something to happen with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for watching paint dry. Vexlin caught herself drumming her fingers against her thigh, a nervous tic she usually reserved for tax audits and dentist appointments. "Any second now," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Nix leaned against a warped pillar of what looked like molten marshmallow, his eyes scanning the mess of colors and chaos. "You say that like you're expecting a parade to come marching through." "I'm expecting something," Vexlin replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Parade, catastrophe, alien overlord inviting us to tea." "You know, the usual." Klee was messing with her weapon, an action Vexlin knew was more for comfort than necessity. "If an alien overlord shows up, can we at least pretend to be civilized for the first 10 seconds? "Sure," Nix said with a grin. "I'll even wear a tie." Vexlin was about to make a crack about Nix's complete lack of fashion sense when the ground beneath them began to pulse, rhythmic and unsettling. It was akin to standing on top of a giant, gelatinous heart, something Vexlin did not recommend for the faint of heart or anyone with a sensitive stomach. "Is this it?" Rax asked, clutching the device like it was a newborn kitten. His fingers moved over it with the kind of delicate care usually reserved for defusing bombs or handling angry cats. "This is it," Vexlin confirmed, hoping she was right. "Let's see if these Viathans are ready for a little human ingenuity." The dreamscape around them shimmered and wavered, like reality itself was being stretched thin. As if on cue, the synthetic chaos swirled into something more solid, more intentional, like a poorly funded 3D simulation finally finding its footing. Shadows twisted and merged, forming the unmistakable silhouette of a figure. "Well, that doesn't look friendly," Nix observed, not reaching for his weapon but eyeing the figure with the kind of wariness one reserves for ex-lovers and tax collectors. As the figure approached, its features became clear. An alien overseer, Viathan by the looks of its elongated limbs and almond-shaped eyes. It stopped a few paces away, regarding them with the kind of disdain usually reserved for low-quality fast food. "Humans," it said, its voice a blend of disdain and curiosity. "You have disrupted our simulation." Vexlin crossed her arms, leaning into the sarcasm like an old friend. "Sorry about that, we thought we'd mix things up. Wouldn't want you getting bored on our account." The Viathan narrowed its eyes, a gesture that seemed more alien than threatening. "You misunderstand. We are not bored, we are intrigued," Nix snorted. "Glad to know we're not just a sideshow for you." Vexlin took a step forward, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. "Intrigued or not, we want out. And we want this cycle to end." The Viathan tilted its head, a bird-like motion that was too smooth, too deliberate. "You wish to be freed? Well, I'm sure as hell not staying for the company," Nix muttered. "Your unpredictability is problematic," the Viathan continued, ignoring Nix's remark. "We expected resistance, but not such ingenuity." Vexlin raised an eyebrow. "You mean you didn't see a bunch of stubborn humans trying to break your shiny toy? Shocking." The Viathan's gaze flicked to Rax's device, the faintest hint of interest sparking in its alien eyes. "That is your tool of disruption." Rax clutched the device closer, his expression a mix of defiance and amusement. "You could say that. Or you could call it our insurance policy." The ground shuddered again, reminding them all that this was still a precarious situation. Vexlin took a deep breath, knowing this was their moment to act. "We want our freedom," she said, her voice firm. "And if you're not willing to give it, well, let's just say we're more than willing to make this place a lot less hospitable." The Viathan studied them, its expression inscrutable. "You believe you have leverage," Nix chuckled darkly. "Leverage? No, but we do have a knack for making things interesting." The Viathan seemed to consider this, and for a moment Vexlin wondered if they'd finally managed to reach some level of understanding, or at least a begrudging respect. But then the alien spoke again, its voice laced with that same infuriating calm. "We will consider your request," it said, turning away as if dismissing them entirely. "However, do not mistake this for a victory. Your actions have simply complicated matters." With that, the figure began to dissolve into the chaos once more, leaving the team standing in the midst of their own uncertainty. "What the hell was that about?" Klee asked, her voice a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Alien diplomacy, I guess," Nix replied with a shrug. "Or maybe just the world's worst customer service." Vexlin turned to Rax, who was still clutching the device like it might disappear at any moment. "We sent the message. Let's hope someone out there actually cares enough to listen." Rax nodded, though his expression was tinged with doubt. "And what if they don't?" "Then we keep trying," Vexlin said, her voice resolute. "We've made it this far. We can make it a little further." The dreamscape continued to pulse around them, a constant reminder that they were still very much trapped. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Vexlin felt a glimmer of hope. Not just because they might have a chance at escape, but because they'd managed to get under the skin of their captors. Humans were nothing if not persistent, and it was about time the universe remembered that. As they settled back into their vigil, Vexlin allowed herself a small smile. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, they'd made their mark. And sometimes, that was enough to start a revolution. "Here's to making things interesting," she said, raising her imaginary glass once more. The Echo Phalanx joined her, their voices a chorus of determination and dark humor. Whatever came next, they were ready for it together. And that, Vexlin thought, was the real victory. The universe might still have plenty of tricks up its sleeve, but they'd just proven they had a few of their own. As long as they kept pushing, kept fighting, and kept laughing in the face of despair, there was always a chance they'd come out on top. "To the end of the line," she echoed Rax's earlier sentiment. And as they waited for whatever the universe had in store, Vexlin knew one thing for certain. They'd never stop fighting, and they'd never stop being human. The Viathans might have their simulations, their loops, and their endless tests, but they'd never understand the true chaos of the human spirit. And that was something no simulation could ever predict. The world around them was like a cheap carnival ride that had spun one too many times, and now it had decided to malfunction just when the Echo Phalanx had finally thought they might have a handle on things. Captain Vexlin Lior stood amidst the chaos, the ground beneath her feet doing its best impression of a drunken sailor. The dreamscape was collapsing, not so much elegantly disintegrating as it was throwing a cosmic tantrum. Colors bled into one another, forming a kaleidoscope of confusion that a less seasoned mind might call beautiful. Vexlin called it a damn mess. "Well, it looks like we hit the self-destruct button," Nix said, sidestepping a particularly aggressive ripple in the ground. "I always wanted to be in a collapsing nightmare dreamscape." "It's right up there with getting an alien probe named after you." Klee, clutching her weapon like a teddy bear in the middle of a thunderstorm, muttered, "If someone could please switch off the apocalypse, that'd be great." Vexlin flashed a wry smile, the kind that said she was trying very hard not to let her lunch make an encore appearance. "Let's focus on finding a way out before this place decides it's the perfect time for a remodel." Rax was already fiddling with the device, his fingers dancing over its surface with a frantic urgency that suggested he was either trying to save them or attempting to beat his high score in some galactic game of Tetris. "I've got a theory that if we can overload their system with our delightful brand of unpredictability, we might just crash the whole simulation." "A theory?" Vexlin raised an eyebrow, the gesture somehow managing to convey skepticism and hope all at once. "It's as solid as any plan we've had so far," Rax shot back, not lifting his eyes from the device. The dreamscape seemed to take offense at their plotting, sending a shudder through the ground that nearly knocked Vexlin off her feet. She danced on more stable things in zero gravity. "Let's hope the Viathans didn't program a no-refunds policy," she said, gesturing for Nix and Klee to stay close. "Rax, do your thing. Make it chaotic. Make it human." Rax nodded, his face a mask of concentration as he manipulated the device with the skill of a man who'd spent far too many hours avoiding contact with anything explosive. He pressed one final button, and the dreamscape shivered, as if the universe itself was about to sneeze. "Brace for impact," Nix shouted, but it was too late for anything other than riding out the end of the world on a wave of adrenaline and sarcasm. Reality crumbled around them in a cacophony of sound and light, and Vexlin felt herself being pulled through a vortex that defied description. It was like being squeezed through a straw that didn't particularly care for her existence. And then, with all the grace of a catapulted brick, they were free. The synthetic dreamscape was gone, replaced by the cold, hard reality of the Echo Phalanx's drop-ship interior. They were sprawled across the floor, breathing hard and blinking at the sudden return of normality, if you could call a dimly lit, gunmetal gray military vessel normal. Nix groaned, rubbing his head. "Well, I guess that was our wake-up call." Vexlin looked around, taking in the familiar sight of their cramped quarters. "Home sweet home," she muttered, though the sentiment was laced with relief. "Everyone in one piece, more or less," Klee answered, checking over her weapon with a soldier's instinct. "Though I wouldn't mind a drink." "Or 10. Rax was already on his feet, pacing like a man who'd been told the bar was closing in 5 minutes. "We did it. We actually did it. We forced the Viathan's hand." Vexlin leaned against a bulkhead, letting the cool metal ground her in reality. "And now what? We poke the bear and hope it doesn't swipe back." "More like we poke and run," Nix said, stretching out his limbs. "But yeah, I'd say we made our point." The ship's comm system crackled to life, a gruff voice filling the cabin. "Echo Phalanx, report in. We lost contact for a while there. Situation." Vexlin hit the comm button, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "This is Captain Lior. We're back and in one piece mostly, and we have a lot to report." "Copy that, Captain. Debriefing room's waiting." "Command wants to hear everything." "Roger," Vexlin replied, closing the channel. She turned to her team, her expression a mix of exhaustion and grim satisfaction. "Let's go tell them how we taught the Viathans a lesson in human tenacity. And maybe, just maybe, figure out our next move." As they made their way to the debriefing room, Vexlin couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just passed a pivotal point in this cosmic chess game. The Viathans might have been watching, waiting for them to break, but they hadn't counted on the resilient, stubborn spirit that defined humanity. The debriefing went about as well as could be expected. Which was to say, not great. The brass listened, nodded, made concerned noises, and then immediately shifted gears into strategic overdrive. Typical. Vexlin found herself standing at the back of the room, letting the chatter wash over her while she processed everything they'd been through. The debriefing had turned into a brainstorming session, the kind that could last for hours and only produce a headache. Nick sidled up next to her, his expression one of wry amusement. "Think they'll appreciate our artistic interpretation of their orders?" "It's not about appreciation," Vexlin said, her voice low. "It's about making sure they understand what we're dealing with. The Viathans are playing a game and we're the pieces they can't predict." "If you ask me, it's a hell of a way to live," Nix replied, not at all serious. "But then again, I'm not one for settling down." Vexlin chuckled, the sound dry and lacking humor. Settling down might be a little hard to come by these days. Across the room, Rax was in animated conversation with a tech officer, likely discussing the finer points of the device they'd used. Whatever insights they could glean from the Viathan technology, it was bound to be a game changer. Clee leaned against the wall, her expression thoughtful as she absently checked her weapon for the umpteenth time. "So what now? We wait for the next round of this cosmic cat and mouse." "Pretty much," Vexlin said, crossing her arms. "But at least now we're not flying blind. We've got a better idea of what we're up against. And we know we can get under their skin," Nix added, a touch of satisfaction in his voice. Vexlin nodded, acknowledging the small victories in a landscape of uncertainty. It wasn't much, but it was something. And sometimes that was all you needed. Eventually, the debriefing wound down, leaving the Echo Phalanx to their own devices. Vexlin found herself back in her quarters, the weight of everything they'd been through pressing down on her shoulders. But there was also a determination, a fire that refused to be snuffed out. "To the end of the line," she whispered to herself, echoing the sentiment that had carried them through the worst of it. But this wasn't the end, not by a long shot. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where humanity had taken a step forward in understanding their alien adversaries. The Viathans might have their simulations and their loops, but they didn't have a monopoly on tenacity. Vexlin knew their actions had consequences, and that they'd likely just painted a target on their backs. But that was the price of defiance, of refusing to be boxed in by someone else's rules. As she sat there, lost in thought, she realized that the victory they'd achieved wasn't just about escaping the dreamscape. It was about proving once and for all that humanity was a force to be reckoned with, that they wouldn't be cowed or controlled by anyone, alien or otherwise. And if the Viathans wanted a fight, well, they just found themselves the perfect opponent. Vexlin had no illusions about the road ahead. It would be hard, filled with challenges and setbacks, but they'd face it together. Because that's what the Echo Phalanx did. They fought, they endured, and they defied the odds stacked against them. "Here's to making things interesting," she said, raising an imaginary glass once more, this time in quiet solitude. Whatever came next, Vexlin knew they were ready. Ready to push back against the tide, ready to carve out their own place in the universe, and most importantly, ready to laugh in the face of despair. Because in the grand scheme of things, that was humanity's real strength. The ability to laugh, to endure, and to fight back with everything they had. To the end of the line, indeed.